While the weeks of October are filled with festive spookiness, it's still a bit warm in the afternoons, vibrant colors abound, and first snow still seems distant. The twilight of December, only a couple of months later, stands in stark contrast. The year seems like a lifetime away. The trees are barren, sharp winds and snow blows. The sun sets early enough to transform what was once a summer afternoon into the black of night. The world, at least in the northern hemisphere, truly seems to have entered into the world of death, cold, and night. And it's no wonder that around this time, just around the solstice and Christmas, this time period has long been one for the telling of tales about ghosts. Made famous by Dickens' 1843 A Christmas Carol, the specifically Christmas Eve ghost story was a Victorian staple, and here at Esoterica, we're trying to bring that tradition back by producing ghost-related content in celebration of the Christmas season. How else would we celebrate Christmas here at Esoterica? This year, I want to wind back the clock all the way to the very beginning of history itself, to the first ghosts recorded in writing, the ghosts of ancient Sumeria, Babylon, and Assyria. What do we know about these first ghosts? How did ancients interact with them, and how did ancient ritual experts even summon them to sight and speech, becoming history's first necromancers? If you're interested in magic, hermetic philosophy, alchemy, Kabbalah, or the history of the occult, I hope you'd subscribe to the channel and check out my other content on topics in esotericism, including curated playlists. Also, if you want to support the work of making this kind of content accessible, scholarly, and freely available here on YouTube, I'd hope you consider supporting my work on Patreon with a one-time donation with the little super thanks option, or you can actually pick up a shirt over at our merch store, so take a look at those. But now, let's return to the very beginning of known history, to the earliest known tales of the shades of the dead and the cautious necromancers that summoned them. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. That the living somehow survive physical death is very likely an idea much older than cities and writing, much older than institutional religion, and maybe even older than Homo sapiens as such. Of course, beyond intentional burial and grave goods, the philosophical and religious dimensions of those ancient ancestors it's forever lost to us. We'll never know what their intentions were. And we're only left with speculation and intuition about what they thought was going on in the afterlife, if there was one for them. However, as the writings of the civilization of the Sumerians, a mysterious people who settled in what is now southern Iraq, was rescued from the oubliette of history, the voices of those ancients could be heard again for the first time in millennia. Among the voices of the Sumerians, along with their cultural inheritors, the Babylonians and the Assyrians respectively, these long-dead voices began to speak, and among the things they spoke about was their own relationship with the dead who refused to die. Of course, to endure death, we must be more than just mere flesh and bone, both of which turn to dust before utterly vanishing. And among the earliest Sumerian epics out of Atrahasis, it tells us that the first human beings were forged from the flesh and blood of the sacrificed god, We-Ilu, mixed with clay by Nintu. We-Ilu was characterized by his temu, or intelligence, or reasoning, or understanding, thus setting up a kind of pun on the Akkadian for the word for human being, Awilum. This pun gets extended by linking the temu, the word for intelligence, with the word for God, We, thus rendering it divine intelligence. Thus, We Temu, or Etemu, becomes the name for that aspect of human beings that survives death, and thus renders the Sumerian word Giddim or Jiddim for when that survival persists despite death. The Itemu as shade of the dead, as a ghost. Like many cultures, these ancient peoples treated death as a transition which, if mismanaged, could result in the return of the dead as Itemu in the form of a malevolent haunting or a spirit possession. This is all the more compounded by the fact that many of the burials in this region were performed beneath the family home, just underneath the floorboards basically, though infants and children were often just buried in the walls, which isn't the least bit creepy. Thus, the physical dead, the corpses of one's ancestors, were often just in physical proximity in ancient Mesopotamia. And by extension, a wayward Etemu was a constant threat. Generally speaking, preventing such a revenant from returning was a relatively simple affair, actually, all things told. Burial of the dead with proper honors and grave goods, or kispu, providing them with libations through a kind of pipe. This would include things like beer and butter and fresh water. This would allow them to eat in the afterlife, so this is the term nakme, and recalling their names with the proper dignity in the appropriate seasons, and the rituals that accompany that are Shuma Zakaru. With these conditions satisfied, the dead dwelled peacefully in the underground world ruled by King Nergal and Queen Ereshkigal, with Shamash, the sun god, passing nightly through the realm of the dead. All things good. Despite this realm being known as Ertsetu Latari, or the world of no return, the earth of no return, the dead of this earliest civilization, they did return, and often enough that elaborate rituals had to be developed to forcibly return them and undo the frightful harm their presence, especially their appearance to sight and hearing, to undo the frightful harm their presence wrought. Though all spirits of the dead made their way to the underworld eventually, the righteous and the wicked, that process could be delayed either by the haphazard circumstances at the time of death, or by the sins committed in one's life that meant prevention of the immediate passage into the netherworld, either by the gods or by the refusal of that honor and the libations necessary by the family of the deceased. In an early incantation text to Utu, this describes a condition whereby a father commits some kind of otherwise unknown sin against his son, such that he is not provided post-mortem libation offerings as a kind of punishment. However, after a specific period of this post-mortem punishment, it's the equivalent of being starved in the netherworld, the sin is absolved, the Itemu is again fed through the libation pipe, and all is set to well. However, for certain outrages against the god, no libations are provided, and the gods seek to erase the sinner's name from memory, thus making them basically cease to exist as such. In a rage, however, these ghosts lash out against the living, and thus the gods, especially the sun god Shamash, must be invoked to repel this ghostly onslaught, and more on these elaborate rituals and incantations in just a moment. However, it wasn't just the ghosts of rageful sinners against the gods that can return in vengeance or simply starving sorrow. Anyone who had died without the proper or just no burial, those wronged in death, those without families or someone to provide them with the necessary libations or recall their names in yearly ceremonies, even those that died unmarried or without children are prone to return seeking in death what they never had in life. Some of those ghosts are simply more sad than vengeful, honestly. We can only take pity on the "I am hungry, let me eat with you" ghost, or especially this time of the year, the "I am so cold, let me get dressed with you" ghost. It's just sad. With any luck, however, simply acknowledging them and providing them some basic honors will allow the gods to guide them safely to the underworld. However, things aren't so simple when dealing with the dead. Of course, to bury the dead correctly, one must have a tomb ready-made to receive the dead, and like many cultures, a range of burial tombs, crypts, and simple Inhumation were known in the ancient Mesopotamian world, mostly tracking to class status. If one were well-to-do enough, one would actually strive to have a crypt ready to receive one's body at the time of death, with the libation tube already connected up to the home above. Though even constructing one's crypt was fraught with metaphysical danger in this culture. In one of the most extensive oracular texts from the period, it's a text called If a City, we learn that crypt building must be a specifically timed activity. That text, by the way, If a City, is a long series, dozens of tablets of oracular statements that take the form of if-then. The title is taken from the first oracle, Shuma Alu Ini Mele Shakin. If a city is set upon a height, it will prove unpleasant to dwell there. And it contains hundreds of such pieces of oracular advice. Some of that advice has to do with when to build one's crypt, and as we'll see in a moment, how to deal with malevolent ghosts. In the case of the crypt, however, the oracles are timed to a given month and any given day of the month, most of which are unlucky, such that the would-be crypt builder would either die in his prime, he would have evil regularly visit his home, his son would die, Ishtar would harass him, he'll get dropsy, his wife will rebel against him, or just that he wouldn't even get buried in the tomb that he's going through all the trouble to build in the first place. In fact, only 4 out of 13 months are relatively safe, and only 3 of the 30 days of that any given month are actually good for building a crypt. This is a general trend in If a City. Most of the oracles are unsurprisingly doleful. It's part of the general pessimistic trend in ancient Mesopotamian culture, which I kind of vibe with. Indeed, ancient life was often poor, nasty, brutish, and short, to bust out some Hobbes, and violent, unexpected death appears to have been common enough to prompt one to the return of one's Itemu. In one of the most elaborate anti-ghost incantation tablets, we have a veritable roll call of the death conditions which would or could result in a haunting. This part's kind of gloomy. Those who drowned in a river or a well, those whose names are unknown, those who were abandoned on the steppe, those who died of fire, thirst, or chill, just a murdered person. They got to come back for vengeance. Those killed for outrages against the gods and kings, those ones with no one to perform the post-mortem rituals, roaming and roving ghosts, a distinction there. The ghosts of murderers, those who died a virgin, boys who died before puberty, men who died unmarried, women who died without children, women who died in childbirth, or even during suckling a child. Those killed in battle and those unburied, lying in a ditch somewhere whose corpse is drenched by storms. Those who died in prison of hunger and thirst, those who have fallen from a roof, or were mauled by wild animals, or disfiguring diseases like leprosy, among a myriad of other dread fates. Clearly, untimely death, especially death without ritual placation, implied the return of the Itemu, and such a fare seems sadly common in the ancient Mesopotamian world. But how did these ghosts manifest? What exactly did they do to the living? In virtually all cases, the appearance of a ghost in sight or sound was a negative omen. No Casper stuff here. In fact, the omen text, If a City, contains a long section of oracles concerning the appearances of ghosts, mostly dealing with ghosts crying out and moaning in a house, nearly all of which mean doom for the household. Remember that pessimism thing I mentioned earlier? Of course, depending on the time of the day, the ghost wails, moans, cries out, weeps, growls, rumbles, or just constantly cries out, nuances just how that doom will befall the household. The appearance of a ghost, or a mitu, literally a dead person, it's very similar to the Hebrew word mate, is also bad news and basically spells the same kind of doom in various nuances. This time often based on who the dead was seen by and at what time of the day or night the dead was seen by whom. This is the members of the household of the family. Another series, nearly 100 lines long, lists a variety of ghosts and their activities, such as those who clamber over roofs, who hurt people like Lilu demons, Lilith cameo, constantly seek out beautiful people. The beautiful people stand at the head of sick people and bare their teeth, grind their teeth, or bark like a dog, slither around like various snakes, always being like a billy goat. I don't know, Black Phillip cameo, who fly around like a wasp, who frequent toilets. It's like the Mazikeen in the Talmud, who hide in cracks, who scare people for no reason, who roam about cities, who leap over ditches, who roar like a lion, who shine like a fire or a star, or the opposite, who are obscure like a black dot, who watch people at noon. You get it. Generally scare and they do creepy stuff to people. They're ghosts, especially sick people. As I mentioned, these lists go on for dozens of lines, indicating just how common all this was. In other words, dealing with the dead was a fact of life. But how? If one were ill and woke to see a ghost at the foot of your bed staring at you, growling like a dog, what did you do? Like, who indeed were you gonna call? You called an Ashipu, specifically a Sha'atimi. I mean, Sha'atimi does mean something like ghost dealer with person. So yeah, you called a Sha'atimi. That's who you were going to call. As one might imagine, with all these ghost complexities, a range of technologies were developed, from simple amulets to complex rituals, probably affordable only by social elites for dealing with ghosts, hauntings, and possessions. Simple amulets would often include a range of various elements such as seeds, various plants, especially plants and substances that were odorous, such as fish oil and sulfur. They could even contain human finger bones, dusts from human skulls, often mixed sometimes with exotic stuff like ape's hair or dust from a lion's skin. These would all be mixed together with very fragrant cedar oil and worn around the neck in a leather pouch, and even the leather was specified. Sometimes similar agents would be prepared with juniper, often seen in a great deal of anti-ghost magic, and these oils would be applied to the feet when you leave bed for the day. Inscribed amulets, writing itself was taken to be quasi-magical and was an elite social marker in the ancient world. Some of these could be as simple as something like Spell of Divine Asochui. This is an epithet from Marduk. Ghost. Don't keep coming in. It's pretty nice and straightforward. Another pretty famous line containing the popular and archaizing Sumerian phrase, Zizig nu'udash sagish lu abdash. Among living things, don't come up. Don't rise thy head, you corpse. Easy. Another spell repeats the name for God, Dingir, over and over and over, and Gedim, the word for ghost, over and over, 7 times to be exact, respectively, before invoking Enlil, Enki, and Utu to send the ghost packing to the netherworld. Some spells even contain apparently nonsense words like Sintalach, Zinzalach, Numalach, Nudalach, Sidalach, etc. Be careful repeating this stuff. Whose origins actually may prove to be ancient Elamite names that actually took on magical powers after their original names lost meaning, much in the same way that quasi-pseudo-Aramaic abracadabra or the pseudo-Latin of Harry Potter still lingers on in magical culture. I think that those Elamite guys were even dog sellers, and then they became anti-ghost magic names. History's weird. Other spells inquire of the ghost in both Akkadian and Sumerian languages, often over a millennium after Sumerian was already a dead language, showing that you might be dealing with real ancient ghosts who only speak Sumerian. Other anti-ghost rituals and incantations can be carried out by a ritual expert or an Ashipu, a kind of ancient exorcist. These complex rituals, often invoking shamash, as I mentioned, would involve creating complex unguents made from plants and oils, which would be smeared about the property before incantations would be uttered 7 times by the exorcist and then 7 times by the victim of the haunting, using magic circles and magical thorns to hold back the ghostly visitations. In other spells, bread and roasted grain would be used to purify an area, but also as a kind of bribe to the haunting Etemu. Remember, they're hungry in a lot of cases. Other more simple rituals would be simply nightly offerings to Shamash, ritual connections with your own ghostly kin, just to make sure you haven't angered them, but then purifications with juniper incense. This episode should be sponsored by a ancient Sumerian anti-ghost gin distillery, considering how much we deal with juniper. I mean, go drink Tommy Shelby's gin and be rid of ghosts and fascists. A more nasty strategy makes the ghost believe that one has poured out a libation of beer, only for the ghost to discover that it's donkey urine. The shot was meant to send the ghost reeling back to the underworld, though pissing off a ghost doesn't seem like a great idea. Don't feed ghosts donkey urine. Other ritual techniques involving dressing dolls, rubbing compounds over them, and burying them in the walls of the home, thus providing a roaming ghost at least a symbolically appropriate burial. This seems to placate them by being symbolically buried in the wall, like the children and the infants buried in your walls in ancient Babylon. In other cases, these dolls would be elaborately decorated. They could be ritually married to themselves or to you, and then divorced before being buried in the walls of the home. Again, this could be a ghost that's seeking out love they never had, and you can get married to them and then divorce them, and they go to the underworld. The Ashipu was also responsible for expelling ghosts that entered into the body, typically they entered your ear, and they cause illness in the living. A specific kind of illness actually was known as Shu Jedema in Sumerian and Katatemi, literally the hand of the ghost. And this could manifest itself in a variety of symptoms, including things like headaches, neck pain, swollen eyes, paralysis in various parts of the body. Ringing and roaring in the ears was a relatively common symptom, nausea, vertigo, and stomach pain, just ancient ailments. This condition was cured by various herbal remedies such as starlight-infused tamarisk. You could also eat the flesh of an owl, followed by the rest of that bird being burned to ash. It would be mixed with cedar resin, which is then rubbed onto the sides of one's head, the temples, to get rid of that ringing. Another condition known as shinitemi, literally the changing of one's reason, it's from the same word as etemu, was a kind of ghost-caused insanity. This condition was treated with one of the most elaborate, even illustrated anti-ghost rituals from the ancient world, involving a ritual doll, which is dressed, then anointed, and struck, or maybe rotated in a certain kind of way, to relieve the condition. In another edition of that anti-ghost ritual, there is a ghost woman, or that woman doll, which is ritually married to another figurine called Abusch, who is actually illustrated as a Babylonian king. Indeed, it appears that the ritual figure is modeled from depictions of none less than the final Babylonian king, Nabonidus, and that king, given his dramatic priority of worshiping the moon god, seen over and against the state god Marduk, kind of heresy a little bit, even spending a decade away, way out in an oasis in the desert, way far from the capital Babylon, to worship this god Sem, along with other peculiarities of his personality, led to the reputation of him as a madman, although that got transferred to Nebuchadnezzar II because history is just a mess. But it's actually unsurprising to marry a ghost whose causes insanity to a ritual doll of a king already thought to be insane. Birds of a feather, sealing both of them away from the minds of the living and thus fixing one's ghost-caused insanity. Another ghost doll incantation requires dressing a male doll in various clothing and travel provisions, along with a female companion doll. At sunrise, one sets up a vessel of beer and juniper incense, more juniper, to see them on their journey away from you. It appears that Shamash perhaps leads the ghost woman doll, who in turn binds and leads the lonely male ghost, that was the original problematic spirit here, off to the underworld. This spell is actually extraordinary because this may very well be the oldest depiction of a ghost in history. The male ghost bound and dragged to the underworld by the spectral doll woman. Maybe it was a ghost shidduch. Given the clear danger posed by the restless dead and the complexities of returning them to the underworld, it should come as no surprise that summoning the dead, or necromancy, was not terribly popular in ancient Mesopotamia. They got rid of the ghost. They didn't so much want to summon the ghosts. Despite this, a few special cases can be found. These ritual experts were actually known in Sumerian as Lu Balaga or Mesopotamian, probably a reference to a kind of drum used in their necromantic ceremonies. Female necromancers were also attested in the obscure Sumerian term Iji Sheed, but simply Mushaletum in Akkadian, literally just a woman who brings up the dead. Although more malevolent and truly frightening necromancers were also known as Narshindu and Narshindatu, the male and female versions of those respectively, along with the Mushelu Tsili, or those who just bring up shades, Silu being a cognate to Selem, or shade, shadow, or image in ancient Hebrew. That Sumerian terms are attested for this practice indicates its great antiquity, but the paucity of ritual texts might also attest to the rarity of the practice of necromancy. I mean, it was clearly a dangerous affair summoning the spirits of the dead because you had to get rid of them because they caused all kinds of problems. An early kind of funny attestation of this practice is actually a letter of complaint from Babylonian merchants posted way over in Anatolia around 19 or 1850 BCE, who actually complained that not even diviners and necromancers could actually sort out what was going on with their business partner back home, who it appears may have fallen into debt and stopped replying to their inquests. So this is a kind of funny first appearance of necromancy in history, because it's basically just a couple guys complaining about the fact that they tried everything to get in touch with their business partner. Another case, more than 1,000 years later, in the Assyrian royal family no less, actually attests to their would-be heir, Ashurnabinipal, son of Esarhaddon, though Esarhaddon isn't the eldest son, importantly, had to actually use necromancers to contact his dead mother, Nakia. In a kind of Game of Thrones with the older brother, he had to secure the vote of his dead mother such that he would be declared crown prince, and sure enough, she speaks beyond the grave and declares him to be the rightful heir. This reveals just how high the stakes were. You drag up the royal dead to get involved in modern politics. Now, this is important because royal dead people often even had very clear posted signs in their tombs telling you not to do this to them. Don't bother me when I'm dead, so this was a dangerous business. For his part, however, Ashurnabinipal did become king of Assyria, apparently with the help of court necromancers and his own mother's ghostly blessing. A handful of necromantic manuals from the 7th through the 4th centuries BCE also survive, the first in history, really. The earliest, from the late Assyrian period, doesn't so much raise the dead from the underworld, but it describes the use of the sachab oil along with a range of other ingredients like moldy wood, honey, the hair of dogs, cats, and foxes, the bristles of chameleons and lizards. Has a kind of Macbeth feel to it. Various parts of frogs and grasshoppers, of course, and all of which were crushed and mixed with wine, water, and milk, along with the famed amyara plant, which is rubbed onto the face of the would-be necromancers and allows one to see and inquire of ghosts. Of course, now that one has made contact with the ghost and asked it a bunch of questions, you have to employ the famed Namborbu ritual to actually protect oneself from its spectral power and then banish it back to the netherworld. Again, we see prayers to Shamash, libations of roasted barley, and beer. They loved beer back then. Yeah, that beer god, Ninkasi. She's a nice god, Ninkasi, along with, again, more further fumigations with the juniper berry incense. One version of this ritual actually has one planting an arrow in, perhaps forcing the ghost into the earth below. Another necromantic practice involves anointing a human skull. This has got real metal. And impelling the ghost to speak through the skull with a compound of crushed partridge, that's the bird, dust from a crossroads, crickets in a potsherd, crushed bricks from ruins were symbols of the haunts of the dead, an idea that survives into Jewish magic. One anoints this human skull, allowing it to bask in starlight overnight, and then in the morning, again, in the safety of the daylight, one consults the ghost of the dead, whose voice would issue forth from the skull, which is real metal, as I mentioned. This practice, by the way, in some form might have survived into Babylonian Jewish necromancy a millennium later. An episode on that will be forthcoming, but skulls with special containers with incantations written on the top of the skull in Aramaic and Hebrew survive, and there were probably some form of survival of this ancient necromancy all the way into the practice of Babylonian era Talmudic Jewish necromancy. So that'll be a fun episode. The latest such manual, even written in Sumerian, showing you how long this language was used, seems to consult the dead in the interest of securing romance, perhaps through erotic binding magic or maybe inquiring of one's dead wife. Again, this is with using libations and rubbing magical compounds on the face with that famous root. Though this spell also contains conditions for if the reply of the ghost is ambiguous or if the ghost just doesn't reply. Of course, you just whip out that Nambubur spell and shoo away the spirit. Again, you're not wasting your time trying to talk to ghosts. You get rid of them. What's finally interesting about these spells is that many of them seem to be the work of a ritual specialist who's actually composed them by stitching together other various spells and thus producing a kind of necromantic spellcraft out of other types of spells, something which I have to suspect actually made the ritual expert or the Ashipu pretty uneasy, to say the least. Again, if it appears that these spells were a rare minority in the ancient Mesopotamian world of spellcraft, it's probably true. Most of ancient Mesopotamian magic dealt with anti-sorcery, anti-demon, and of course, anti-ghost magic. Yet, here we are, presented with some of the earliest necromancy and necromancers in all of history. The first civilizations were indeed haunted. Ghosts abounded in ancient Sumeria, Babylon, and Assyria, and given this fact, several millennia worth of technology were developed and deployed by every layer of society, from folk magic to state-backed necromancy, to understand, diagnose, and dispel such ghosts. And as we've seen, in even rare cases, this technology was even used for the fearful act of summoning and seeing, inquiring of such beings. And as we come into the darkest days of the year, and at least my thoughts turn to the realm of the ghostly, I think we can all be thankful not to be on the other side of the veil. This episode would have been impossible without the living legend, the GOAT, Irving Finkel's recent book on the first ghosts. If this episode has piqued your interest, then you absolutely have to get his volume. This episode is basically based on his book. It is the best possible combination of wonderfully well-written, hilarious, academically solid. You should get it. You should read it twice. You won't regret it. It is one of my favorite books released this year. Also, if you're interested in ancient Mesopotamian magic in general, just get your hands on anything written by Tzvi Abusch, especially his Mesopotamian Witchcraft toward a history and understanding of Babylonian witchcraft beliefs and literature. It's a expensive, I think it's published by Brill. It's expensive, but it's really great. You can get his less expensive and more specialized Witchcraft series Maklu for something a little bit more compact. I actually have an entire episode on that famous anti-sorcery spell, the Maklu ritual, one of the best attested and most ancient pieces of ritual magic in all of the ancient world. Until soon, I want to wish everyone a wonderful ongoing holiday season. Ex tenebris lux. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and thank you for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.